So today we're going to be talking about ambition and isolation, two of the major themes in Gris Grimley's Frankenstein. There are three things we're going to look at today. The first is narrative structure, the title of this PowerPoint. We're going to be looking at what an epistolary approach to storytelling is and what extra elements that brings to a story. We're going to also be looking at the links that we can draw between Frankenstein and other texts. This is a process we call intertextuality, and it's really key to the Langlet course, where we compare two texts and we find common themes. And the third thing we're going to look at is the idea of romantic heroes, and we're going to draw some comparisons between modern day romantic heroes and traditional romantic heroes. Now, firstly, when we talk about narrative structure is just the story and the structure of the story. And in Frankenstein, there are three narratives. The first is Walton. Walton is an Arctic explorer, and he's telling us the story of his adventure. These are the letters that we've seen at the beginning of the book, and he's writing letters to his sister, telling her about his adventures. So we've already started to look at that aspect of the narrative. The second narrative is Frankenstein telling his story of creating the monster and pursuing the monster all the way to the Arctic. And then the third aspect of the narrative is the monster himself, recounting his story of his upbringing in the ice cave in Switzerland. So by having these three narratives, it's quite clear that it gives three different perspectives to the story, and it means that it adds a lot of depth. And this is called an epistolary approach, a narrative in which the story is told via letters. Now, in our contextual research lesson, we talked about the rhyme of the ancient mariner, and we heard about this strange magical realism story where the mariner killed an albatross and was punished by God. Now, the reason there is a lot of connections with this text is because the mariner is telling his story. He's doomed to tell his story and recount his story. And it was Samuel Coleridge who was a regular visitor of Mary Shelley's father when growing up. So they had a personal connection as well as a stylistic connection. So Frankenstein is similar. He's doomed, just as Walton is, to tell his story so that they might make the story worthwhile. In the PowerPoint, you can see the quote, "To deduce an apt moral." To deduce means to find or work out, an apt means appropriate, and a moral means a lesson. So he's doomed to tell his story so that a lesson can be learned from it. If no lesson is learned and he doesn't share his story, everything that happened was for nothing. So we refer to the rhyme of the ancient mariner and Frankenstein as parables. A parable is a bit like a story with a moral, so a story with a lesson. And in the image, we can see the ship HMS Terror. This is the ship from the rhyme of the ancient mariner, and we can see the ship in the ice, and it's stuck, it's doomed by nature. This is one of the punishments that we can imagine happened in the story of the rhyme of the ancient mariner. So I mentioned that Frankenstein is an epistolary novel. So an epistolary novel tells its story through letters. The whole story of Frankenstein is told through Walton's letters to his sister in England. At times, it's easy to forget that they're letters, but we need to bear that in mind the whole way through the story. And we also have letters from Frankenstein's family, and they try to reconnect with Frankenstein, but he's completely isolated and completely alienated from them. And that's going to be an important piece of information when we start to think about romantic heroes. Letters are a form of human connection across distances. So their very existence expresses that there is distance and social isolation. Of course, modern day, very cliche, we have email and we have technology, but at the time when we rely on letters, it means that there is physical distance and potentially emotional distance between us. So we're talking about being isolated and lonely. The setting of Frankenstein is a really important feature. We have these icy, deserted, hostile landscapes, and that's where Frankenstein tells his whole story to Walton. The landscape really reflects the desolation, the isolation, and the separation that Shelley implies are the end result of male ambition. We can remember from previous lessons that Shelley was struggling mentally with the loss of several babies, and she suffered several miscarriages and stillbirths. So we can see that there are perhaps parallels to be drawn here. Perhaps she was also feeling isolated. Now, this idea of isolation is really important to understanding what a romantic hero is. Lord Byron, pictured, was the one who initiated the horror story writing competition at the villa in Switzerland, which led to the creation of the Gothic fiction Frankenstein and Vampire. Remember, they were bored and they decided to write stories in a competition against each other. Lord Byron was a poet, he was an adventurer, and he is a real archetype of what we imagine a romantic hero to be. A romantic hero is outside civilization. They are ambitious, they are egotistical, they are tortured by their own desires and fears, but they're also quite eccentric, they're charismatic, and they're daring. They really want to experience life fully, and they often achieve extraordinary things. Because of this, they often die young, and they are very mysterious people because they are so separate to society. Often romantic heroes are consumed with their desire for something unattainable. There is no limits to their imagination, and they long for something more, something that's unattainable or unachievable. So this could be a longing for the past or a sense of nostalgia, but it also can be a longing for the impossible. And that's when we have these fantasy elements coming in. And when we talked about enlightenment and romanticism and the connection between them, we can see that in Frankenstein, where the romantic hero is pursuing the reaches of science. What could electricity do for creation of new life? And Walton as well is a romantic hero because he is a literal adventurer. He is traveling to the Arctic to find new territories. Now, in modern day, we still have parallels to a romantic hero. For example, we have adventure tourism, where people pay to attempt really impressive exploits, things like climbing Mount Everest, and a lot of people die doing this. So if you want to achieve something great, such as climbing Mount Everest, it also raises the question, why? You won't be the first person to do it. You won't be the most talented person to do it. You won't set a new record, and you put yourself in danger, which can potentially cause danger to others as they save you, and it can cause a lot of grief for your loved ones. So this is a very egotistical thing to do. And you can think about the other modern adventures and explorations that fit into this category of daring human limits for personal achievement, bungee jumping, any unnecessary risk. But we still admire such achievements, even if they cause physical harm to us. So we definitely still have this fascination with the limits of human experience. Now, this is one of the tasks I'd like you to attempt. You can pause the video here and have a go at it. The task is to record your thoughts to the above question. What kind of world has been created by the exploits of romantic heroes who dare the limits of what it means to be human through scientific discovery and exploration? Men like Einstein, Oppenheimer, Shackleton. If human beings continue to admire such creative and daring talents, where might we end up? Pause the video here and record your answer in your learning portfolio. Now, Shelley looks at these questions and she answers them through her use of setting and the fact that Walton's ship is outclassed by the natural world around him. He is daring, he's ambitious, but nature is stronger than him. She also explores these questions through the monster, a symbol of how these ambitions lead to the creation of monsters, metaphorically and literally, such as capitalism and industrialization, and how this has led to the monster of climate change. Trying to ignore this monster did not turn out so well for Frankenstein. The parable, the lesson here, is asking us to question, if we ignore the monster we create every day with our pollution, will it turn out any better to us? And to what extent is the human capacity for creativity actually self-destructive. Now, at the beginning of the graphic novel, we can see the pictures and the map of the Northern Expedition, which shows Walton's ship alone in a sea full of monsters. We've got this faux parchment and this cursive script style, so the letter really creates a sense of realism and a sense of intimacy with the character. Now we're going to look at those letters in a bit more detail. What I'd like you to do is choose a letter from the beginning of the novel. It could be one of the ones that we have already started to work with, or it could be another. And I want you to identify and write a short paragraph which unpacks two language features and how they shape Shelley's meaning. If you don't have the novel at home, you can choose one of the extracts from the following slides. You can record your answers in your learning portfolio and use the title, The Language of Walton's Letters.